Look, nobody on the Galactic Council really wanted to admit that humans were terrifying. It wasn't politically correct. It wasn't diplomatically sound. And it certainly wasn't something you brought up at the annual Unity Summit. Unless you wanted to be labeled a xenophobe by the Pleiadian delegation, who, let's be honest, had never met a species they couldn't condescend to. But facts were facts, and the facts were currently being demonstrated on Security Monitor 7 Alpha in ways that made Ambassador Vicnal of the Corin Collective deeply regret his third breakfast. "Explain to me again," he said, his four eyes rotating independently to focus on different parts of the holographic display, why we thought it was a good idea to challenge the humans to a joint military exercise. Commander Thalora, whose species had evolved from ambush predators and really should have known better, made a sound like grinding gravel. The Council wanted to assess their capabilities, standard protocol for new member species. Their regular military capabilities, Vixnell specified. Watching as a human soldier did something physically improbable, with a grappling hook and what appeared to be sheer spite. Their normal forces, the ones they assured us were just regular infantry, nothing special. Yes, then why? Vixnell gestured at the screen with 3 of his 6 manipulator limbs. Are we now watching something they're calling special forces absolutely humiliate the Drain shock troops? On screen, a human wearing more equipment than seemed structurally feasible had just cleared an obstacle course designed for species with natural flight capabilities, without flying. In fact, the human had done it faster than the actual flying species. "That's Lieutenant Ryan Kowalski," Flora said, checking her datapad. "Human designation, Navy SEALs. Apparently, that stands for sea, air, and land, which should have been our first clue that something was wrong with their classification system. Why? They're a spacefaring species, Ambassador. There is no sea in space." Brixnell felt a headache forming in his primary consciousness node. Continue. "According to the briefing documents the humans provided, which I'm beginning to suspect were deliberately understated, their special forces represent approximately 3% of their total military population. 3%, Vixnell repeated slowly. And the other 99, 7%, those are the ones we've been afraid of for the last 15 cycles. Let's back up for a moment, because context is important, and also because watching Kowalski perform what the humans called a halo jump in a combat environment was giving Vixen heart palpitations in organs he didn't know could palpitate. Humans had joined the Galactic Council 20 cycles ago, and from day one they'd been concerning. Not because they were aggressive. Well, not only because they were aggressive, but because they approached warfare with the kind of enthusiasm most species reserved for mating season, or particularly good fungi. Their regular military was terrifying enough. The human infantry operated in environments that would kill most council species within minutes. Their marines apparently considered atmospheric re-entry a viable insertion method. Their rangers could survive for weeks in hostile territory, eating things that wouldn't qualify as food on any civilized world. And everyone just kind of accepted that this was normal for humans. Traumatizing, yes, but normal. Then someone, Vicnal suspected it was Ambassador Plessish, who had all the survival instincts of a solar flare, had suggested a joint military exercise to foster cooperation, they'd said. To build trust, they'd said to show that the Council can work alongside human forces without anyone having a panic attack. They definitely hadn't said, but everyone was thinking. The humans had agreed with what, in retrospect, was suspicious enthusiasm. "We'll send some of our standard units," the human military liaison had promised. "Nothing too intense. Just regular soldiers." That should have been the end of it. A nice controlled demonstration of human capabilities, maybe some light weapons testing, perhaps a simulation or two. Then 3 days into the exercise, someone on the human side had apparently decided that regular was boring. Contact in Sector 7, Theora announced, her combat display lighting up with threat indicators. The Vraxian Guard have engaged human units. The Vraxian Guard were no joke. 8 feet tall, natural armor plating, and a cultural affinity for violence that made them the Council's go-to species for situations that require aggressive negotiation. They'd been the dominant military power in 3 sectors until humanity showed up and made everyone recalculate their threat assessments. On the monitor, 6 Vraxian soldiers advanced through a mock urban environment, their scanner nets active, their plasma rifles hot. They moved with the confidence of apex predators who'd never met anything they couldn't overwhelm. Then they met Sergeant Danny O'Brien. O'Brien materialized, and that really was the only word for it. From a position that, according to the terrain scanners, shouldn't have concealed anything larger than a maintenance drone. One moment, empty street, next moment, 180 lb of human, wearing face paint that made him look like Death's less stable cousin. The Vraxians never knew what hit them. Actually, that's not true. They knew exactly what hit them because O'Brien was polite enough to announce it. Flashbang out, the Vraxians, who had excellent hearing across 7 different frequency ranges, experienced all 7 of those ranges being violated simultaneously. By the time they recovered, O'Brien had eliminated 4 of them with rubber training rounds, repositioned twice, and was apparently having a conversation with someone via his communication headset. Yeah, I know, but I'm telling you, Briggs, the Vraxian armor has a weak point at the neck joint. No, I don't care what the briefing said. I'm looking at it right now. It's like they designed it specifically for someone to hold on. O'Brien paused mid-con conversation to neutralize the 5th Vraxian, who had finally figured out where the attack was coming from. The human achieved this by doing something that violated at least 3 laws of physics, and possibly 1 law of good taste, using a grappling line to swing around a corner while simultaneously firing behind him. Anyway, O'Brien continued, like he hadn't just turned a trained warrior into a cautionary tale. I'm thinking Thai food tonight. Yeah, the place with the good curry. Can you grab contact? Right. The 6th Vexian, who had been trying to flank O'Brien, learned why humans had evolved persistence, hunting as their primary predator strategy. O'Brien didn't run fast. He didn't need to. He just never stopped moving, never stopped adjusting, never stopped being exactly where the Vraxian wasn't expecting. The Vraxian Guard's team leader, watching from the command post, made a sound like a deflating pressure valve. What? What is that? That said the human liaison officer, a woman named Captain Patricia Hendris, who had the disturbing habit of smiling when things exploded, is Delta Force US Army Special Operations. We've got about 10 more teams like his in the exercise. 10 more, the Vraxian repeated weakly. Oh, that's just Delta. We've also got some Rangers, a few Green Berets, some Mars Raiders. And she checked her tablet. Oh, good. The Air Force sent some pair of rescue jumpers. Those guys are fun. They're the ones who specialize in rescuing people from places where everyone should definitely be dead. How many total special operations personnel in this exercise? Rix did some quick math. About 200, give or take. Out of how many humans total in the exercise? For breakfast before the enemy did. They've recruited the Pleiadian observers. Falora reported, her voice carefully neutral. In the last 8 hours, the Green Berets have somehow convinced a neutral party to provide them with real-time intelligence on Draren movements. How? According to the Pleiadians, the humans just seemed really interested in their culture. and asked nice questions, and offered to teach them hand-to-hand combat techniques that wouldn't violate Pleiadian non-violence principles. Vixnell stared at the screen. The humans weaponized politeness. It appears so. Monitor 8 was worse, or better. Vixnell was no longer sure how to categorize what he was seeing. What am I looking at? That would be Master Chief Samuel Foster. Human Naval Special Warfare. Currently, he is. Thalora paused her translator implant, struggling with the concept. Swimming through the ventilation system. The ventilation system has no water. I'm aware. On screen, Foster was indeed moving through a maintenance shaft with a fluidity that suggested his species had evolved for exactly this purpose, which they absolutely had not. Humans were persistence hunters from a savanna world. They had no business being that comfortable in a narrow metal tube 300 meters above the ground. Foster reached an intersection, paused, and spoke into his comm. This is Trident 1. I have eyes on the objective. Moving to secure. Trident 1. Be advised, a voice responded. You have 2 Droran sentries between you and the target. Copy that. 2 tangos. I'll take the scenic route. The scenic route involved Foster exiting the ventilation shaft, scaling the exterior of the building, using nothing but his fingers, and what appeared to be pure spite, entering through a window 3 floors up, and neutralizing both sentries before they registered his presence. The entire maneuver took 45 seconds. I really hate to ask, Vixnell said, but how many different types of special forces do the humans have? Captain Hendris, who had joined them in the command center, brightened. Oh, you want the full list? Let's see. Army's got Delta, Rangers, Special Forces groups, Civil Affairs, Psychological Operations, though I guess that's more specialized than special. Then there's Navy SEALs, SWCC, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. EOD isn't technically Special Operations. Another human interjected. Fair point. Anyway, Marines have Mars, Force Recon if you count them. Then Air Force has Pararescue, Combat Control, Special Reconnaissance, and Tactical Air Control. Oh, and the Coast Guard has their deployable specialized forces, though they're usually doing drug interdiction. Stop, Vixnell said. Please stop. I haven't even gotten to the CIA's Special Activities Center, or the FBI's Hostage Rescue Team. Or why do you have so many? The command center went quiet. Rix looked genuinely confused by the question. Because different situations require different capabilities, she said, like this was obvious. SEALs specialize in maritime operations. Delta handles hostage rescue and counter-terrorism. Rangers do direct action and airborne operations. Special forces focus on unconventional warfare and foreign internal defense. Mars does. They're all soldiers. Vixnell's voice had climbed into a register, usually reserved for mating calls. They all fight. Why do you need 20 different kinds of soldiers who fight? Well, they don't all fight the same way. Rix explained patiently. That's like asking why you need different tools. Sure, they're all tools, but you can't fix a hyperdrive with a hammer. A hammer is a perfectly adequate tool for many. Vixnell caught himself. This is not the point. The point is that we thought your regular military was terrifying. We've spent 15 cycles trying to develop strategies to potentially counter human infantry. And now you're telling us that those soldiers, the ones we've been having nightmares about, those are just the common ones. I mean, common is kind of a loaded term. Rick said, our regular military is highly trained and extremely capable. It's just that special operations personnel undergo additional training for specific mission sets that require, sir. Theora interrupted. You need to see this. On Monitor 1, the main display, something unprecedented was happening. The Drorian shock troops, the Council's absolute best, The elite of the elite warriors, who had literally never lost an engagement, had encountered a team of human parkour jumpers. The Drorans had been running an extraction drill, attempting to rescue a downed pilot from hostile territory. It was what they did best. They'd practiced this scenario 10,000 times. They were good at it. Then they discovered that the humans had gotten there first. Draw an assault leader to command. The comcrack crackled. We have arrived at the extraction point. The pilot is gone. Gone. The entire area is secure. Medical supplies have been deployed. Someone has already performed triage. There's a note. What does it say? A pause. Patients stabilized and evacuated. Injuries treated included compound fracture of the right manipulator appendage, plasma burns to the thorax region, and mild concussion. Recommend follow-up at medical facility within 12 hours. P.S. Your security perimeter had a gap at Sector 7. Might want to look at that. PJ Team 3 silence in the command center. They took the casualty, the Draran commander said, from a hot zone before we could even arrive, and treated him. Vixnall said weakly. They went into hostile territory, extracted a wounded soldier, provided medical care, and left a note with recommendations. That's their job, Hendricks said, shrugging. That's what pairs that others may live and all that. They're trained to extract and treat casualties in any environment. Combat, natural disasters, behind enemy lines, underwater, mountains, you name it. If someone needs medical attention in a place where medical attention shouldn't be possible, you call a PJ. They're medics. Combat medics. Yeah, but like extreme combat medics. They go through 2 years of training. Basically, if a Navy SEAL had a baby with a trauma surgeon, you'd get a PJ. Vixnor wished his species consumed alcohol. He was starting to understand why humans had invented it. Let me see if I understand this correctly, he said slowly. Your special forces include soldiers who specialize in being nice to people, soldiers who specialize in appearing from nowhere, soldiers who specialize in extreme environments, soldiers who specialize in rescuing people, soldiers who specialize in blowing things up, soldiers who specialize in, honestly, sir, most of them specialize in at least 3 or 4 of those things. Hendricks said, cross-training is big in special operations. A lot of these guys are qualified in multiple disciplines. Foster the SEAL you were watching. He's also a qualified sniper, a combat medic, and a demolitions expert. Has a degree in mechanical engineering, too. But that's more of a hobby. A hobby. He likes to understand how things work before he breaks them. On Monitor 4, a Green Beret team was teaching Pleiadian observers how to field strip a weapon, while simultaneously conducting a cultural exchange about pottery techniques. On Monitor 6, a group of rangers had just completed a forced march that had broken the previous record set by the Vraxians by 3 hours. They'd done it while carrying twice the equipment load. On Monitor 9, a Delta Force operator had somehow infiltrated the Droran command post. Left a note saying, "Your security needs work," and exfiltrated before anyone noticed he'd been there. The note had been left on the Droran commander's chair, under his personal sidearm. "I need to sit down," Vicknell said. "You are sitting, sir," the Laura pointed out. "Then I need to sit down harder." The final exercise was scheduled for Day 7. It was supposed to be a grand finale, a full-scale combat simulation that would showcase the combined might of Council forces working alongside human units. The Drorans, Vraxians, Korans, and 3 other major military powers, all coordinating against a mock enemy force. The humans had volunteered to play the enemy force. "This is a mistake," Vicknell told the Council before the exercise began. "This is a huge species-defining mistake." "Nonsense," Ambassador Please said. their gas bodies shimmering with confidence. We've studied their tactics. We've analyzed their capabilities. We have numerical superiority, positional advantage, and complete intelligence on their deployment. Numbers and superior firepower. It would have been a perfect strategy against any conventional force. Unfortunately, there was nothing conventional about what they were facing. The first sign of trouble came when a Corran armored column reported that their vehicles had somehow developed flat tires. All of them simultaneously. How do you get a flat tire on an anti-grav vehicle? The commander demanded. Nobody had an answer, but they did find a small card stuck to one of the vehicles. It read, "Courtesy of the Green Berets. P.S. We also replaced your ammunition with blanks. Sorry, not sorry." The second sign was when the Vraxian Guard, advancing through what should have been secured territory, encountered what they later described as the forest itself becoming hostile. There were humans in the trees, one soldier reported, and in the ground and possibly in the air, though I might have been hallucinated that part due to stress. The Rangers had essentially turned 10 square kilometers of woodland into their personal playground, using terrain, camouflage, and a truly disturbing level of patience to create an environment where every shadow might contain death, and every clear path was absolutely a trap. The third sign was when communications started going haywire. Channels were jammed. Encrypted frequencies were somehow compromised. And at one point, the Droran network started broadcasting what the humans apparently considered classic rock at high volume. "Is that music?" Commander Thelora asked, listening to something that sounded like organized chaos with guitars. "That's Fortunate Son by Seden's Clearwater Revival," Captain Hendricks said. "I do not know whether to be impressed or concerned that our cyber operations guys are having that much fun." The fourth, fifth, and sixth signs all happened simultaneously when Delta Force, SEAL Team 3, and a Mars unit executed a coordinated strike on 3 separate objectives that the Council had considered absolutely secure. They weren't elaborate attacks. They were worse. They were efficient. Delta hit the command center, neutralized security, captured the commanding officers, and were back out before the alarm even finished sounding. The SEALs infiltrated from the water, despite the fact that the base was nowhere near water. They'd apparently found a drainage system and secured the armory. Mars took out communications and power in a synchronized assault that suggested they'd been planning this for weeks, not days. The entire operation took 12 minutes. Status report, Vixnell demanded, watching his carefully organized military exercise disintegrate in real time. The Corrans have lost their armor to what appears to be sabotage and psychological warfare. The Vraxians are reporting that the forest is angry at them. The Drorans have lost command and control. 3 major objectives have been compromised. And Flora paused, her sensory appendages quivering. "I'm getting reports that someone has drawn a mustache on the war memorial in Sector 3. That last part seems less critical. It's a sacred drawn war memorial, sir. From the founding battles. It's been standing for 1,000 years, and now it has a mustache. Apparently quite a detailed one. Impermanent marker. Who would there's a note? Lighten up. Scop." Flora looked up from her console. Apparently that's psychological operations. Vixnell felt something in his thorax give up entirely. They have soldiers whose job is to draw on things. Their job is to influence enemy morale and Decision M. Chris corrected. The mustache is just style points. The exercise officially ended at hour 6, when it became clear that the Council forces had lost. Not we're losing, had lost. Past tense complete verb. The final tally was embarrassing. 15,000 Council troops, 200 human special operations personnel, Casualty ratio 12-1 in favor of the humans. Objectives secured humans. All of them. All of Council, none of them. War crimes committed, 0. Actual approximately infinite emotional. The after-action review was held in the main conference hall, which was large enough to hold all the various species, delegations, and their egos. Currently, it was mostly holding shock, and something that might have been existential dread. If existential dread were a contagious disease, let's review, Vixnell said, standing at the podium, because sitting down felt like defeat. In the past 7 days, we have learned several things about human special operations forces. First, they can appear and disappear at will. Second, they can survive anywhere. Third, they have apparently weaponized friendship, rudeness, and artistic expression. Fourth, there are dozens of different types of them, each specialized in their own particular brand of making everyone else question their life choices. We were unprepared, the Drarian commander admitted, which was the closest his species ever came to saying, "We got our butts handed to us. We were more than unprepared." Vixnell corrected, "We were, and I'm going to use a human term here, hilariously outmatched. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night. These aren't even most of your soldiers. These are a tiny fraction. The rest of your military, the part we were already afraid of, those are the normal ones." Well, Hendrik said, "I wouldn't say normal. Our regular military is very..." Please don't finish that sentence. "I'm not sure my species' cardiovascular system can handle it." One of the Pleiadian observers raised a tentacle. "I have a question. Go ahead." The Green Berets taught us 12 different pottery techniques, 3 hand-to-H hand combat methods, and somehow convinced us to share intelligence on our own allies. How? That's their job, Hendrik said simply. Unconventional warfare includes building rapport with local populations. They built rapport in 8 hours. Yeah, they're pretty good at it. Lieutenant Kowalski, the SEAL who had started this whole mess by being unnaturally good at obstacle courses, stood up. "If I may, Ambassador." Vixnell gestured weakly for him to continue. "I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding here," Kowalski said. "Special operations isn't about being better soldiers though. Yeah, the training is intense. It's about being able to operate in environments and situations where conventional forces can't or shouldn't, such as Vixnell asked. Small team operations, hostile territory, limited support, unconventional tactics. Think of it this way. Regular military is a hammer, big, powerful, effective. Special operations is like a complete toolbox. Sometimes you need a hammer, but sometimes you need a screwdriver, a wrench, and something to pick a lock. And you have specialized soldiers for all of those, more or less. SEALs for maritime ops, Delta for counter-terrorism, Rangers for airborne assault, Special Forces for training allied forces, Mars for special reconnaissance, Rescue for personnel recovery. It's about having the right tool for the job. But you're all terrifying, Frixel said. It wasn't a question. Well, yeah, Kowalski admitted, but in different ways. That's the point. Sergeant O'Brien, the Delta operator, who had personally humiliated the Vraxian guard, raised his hand. Can I add something? Why not? This day can't get worse. The thing is, we don't see ourselves as scary. We're just really committed to being good at our jobs. And our jobs require us to operate in conditions that most people would consider impossible. So, we train until impossible becomes merely unlikely. And then we train some more until unlikely becomes routine. You jumped out of a spacecraft, a Corran officer said, at orbital velocity with nothing but a parachute. And what you called good vibes. Halo insertion. Yeah, that's standard. It's insane. It's effective. O'Brien corrected. And honestly, compared to some of the stuff we train for, it's pretty tame. There's a reason it takes years to become qualified. Years? Vixnell repeated. You spend years training to do things that nobody should be able to do. Pretty much. Yeah, Master Chief Foster, the SEAL who had somehow swam through a ventilation system, leaned back in his chair. Look, Ambassador, I get it. From your perspective, we're these terrifying super soldiers who can do impossible things. But from our perspective, we're just doing our jobs. Jobs we volunteered for, trained for, and take very seriously. But why? Vixnell finally asked. Why create these specialized units? Why push your people to these extremes? Foster considered this. Because someone has to be able to operate in the worst situations. Because when things go completely sideways and everyone else has evacuated, someone needs to be willing and able to go in. Because sometimes the mission requires a scalpel instead of a hammer. And because he smiled slightly. We're humans. Extreme is kind of our thing. That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. Captain Hrick stood up, smoothing her uniform. If I can address the council, please, Brixnell said. Add to my comprehensive understanding of why humanity is terrifying. It's not about being terrifying, Hendricks said. It's about capability. Yes, special operations personnel are highly trained. Yes, they can operate in extreme conditions. Yes, they specialize in tactics that seem unconventional to outside observers. But at the end of the day, they're still just people doing a job. People who can infiltrate a secure facility, neutralize trained guards, complete their mission, and escape without being detected, the Dron commander pointed out. Well, yes, people who can survive for weeks in hostile territory with minimal supplies. That too. People who apparently befriend local populations as a tactical option. It's very effective. People who drew on a sacred monument. Okay, the S-Cup guys maybe got a bit carried away with that one, Rix admitted. But the point stands. Special operations exists because there are situations where conventional military force isn't appropriate or feasible. We need people who can think creatively, adapt quickly, and operate independently in high-stress environments. And you have thousands of them, Vixnell said quietly. Well, tens of thousands across all branches and specialties. Yes, tens of thousands of soldiers who are individually capable of defeating forces 10 times their size. When properly deployed, with good intelligence and planning, yes. Vixnell looked around the conference hall, at the assembled military leadership of the Galactic Council, species who had dominated their regions of space for centuries, warriors who had won countless battles, strategists who had never known defeat. All of them looked like they just discovered that their understanding of warfare was fundamentally incomplete. I think, Vixnell said slowly, that the Council needs to reconsider our military integration timeline with humanity. Sir, Theora asked. We were planning to spend the next 50 cycles gradually integrating human forces into Council operations. Yes, slowly building cooperative capabilities, developing joint doctrine, that sort of thing. That was the plan. Yes, new plan. We do all of that, but we also make absolutely certain that humanity remains our ally forever, permanently. We sign treaties. We build cultural exchanges. We make sure that those special forces, people never ever have a reason to operate against Council interests. That seems wise. The Droran commander agreed. I never want to see what a full deployment of human special operations looks like. Actually, Frick said, this was a pretty limited deployment. Full deployment would involve coordination with air support, cyber operations, intelligence assets, and probably some units I'm not clear to talk about. The silence that followed could have been weaponized. "There are more," the Vraxian officer asked weakly. "Oh yeah, I mean, I didn't even mention the Hrix court herself," noting the expressions around the room. "You know what? Let's save that for another time. Don't want to overwhelm anybody." "Too late," Vicnal muttered. The final ceremony was held on day 8. A formal conclusion to the exercises. Awards were given, speeches were made, and absolutely nobody mentioned the fact that 200 humans had thoroughly embarrassed 15,000 of the council as best warriors. Well, almost nobody. Before we conclude, Vixnal said, standing at the podium one last time, "I want to thank the human special operations personnel for their participation in this exercise. You have given us a comprehensive, thorough, and deeply disturbing education in modern warfare." Polite laughter from the audience. "You have demonstrated capabilities we didn't know were possible. You have executed tactics we couldn't have imagined. And you have done all of this while maintaining professionalism, good humor," and he glanced at the Pleiadian delegation, "teaching pottery techniques." More laughter, this time genuine. But most importantly, Vixnal continued, "You have shown us what true dedication to military excellence looks like. Your training, your skill, your commitment, it's extraordinary. And yes, also terrifying. But I'm choosing to focus on the extraordinary part." Kowalski, O'Brien, Foster, and the rest of the special operations personnel stood as Vixnal addressed them directly. The Council has spent 15 cycles being cautiously afraid of human military capabilities. After this week, I can say with absolute certainty that our caution was justified. But I can also say that we're grateful, deeply, profoundly grateful, that humanity chose to join the Council as allies. Because the alternative, the Draorian commander added, standing, would be absolutely unacceptable. The assembled Council forces stood as well, a show of respect that transcended species and culture. To the humans, Vixnal raised his glass. "And their special forces, may we never ever be on the opposite side of a battlefield from them." "Hear, hear," the hall echoed. Later, as the various delegations prepared to depart, Vixnal found Captain Hrix reviewing after-action reports on her datapad. "Captain," he said, "a word?" "Of course, Ambassador, be honest with me. On a scale of 1 to 10, how badly could your special forces have beaten us if they'd been trying?" Hrix considered this. "This was a training exercise, Ambassador. We were specifically holding back to avoid causing actual harm." "I know. That's why I'm asking." "Well," Hrix smiled, "let's just say that what you saw this week was maybe a 4. 5, if I'm being generous. Vixnal's manipulator appendages went limp. A 4. We weren't using a lot of our more advanced tactics. Didn't want to reveal everything, you know. Plus, nobody brought the really fun equipment. And we specifically told the SCOP guys to keep it light on the psychological warfare. Didn't want to traumatize anybody. The mustache on the war memorial was keeping it light. Comparatively speaking, yes." Rixnall was quiet for a moment. "Captain, how does your species do it? How do you create soldiers like that? Is it genetic? Some sort of enhancement program?" "Nothing like that," Hendrik said. "It's training, selection, and culture. We find people who are willing to push themselves beyond normal limits. We train them relentlessly, and we build a culture that celebrates excellence and innovation. Most importantly, we teach them to think special operations isn't about following orders blindly. It's about understanding the mission and figuring out the best way to accomplish it, even if that means drawing on monuments, especially then." Hrix grinned. "Scoop doesn't just want to demoralize the enemy. They want to get inside their heads, make them question things, create psychological pressure. A mustache on a sacred monument. That's saying we can reach anything, even your most protected symbols. And you can't stop us. It's actually pretty sophisticated when you think about it. I hate that it makes sense. Most people do, until they're on the receiving end. Then they just hate it. Vixnell watched as the last of the special operations teams boarded their transports. They looked like regular soldiers, he thought. Nothing about their appearance screamed elite warrior, capable of defeating forces 10 times their size. That was somehow worse. One more question, he said. Shoot. The regular human military, your infantry, your standard forces, they're the ones we've been concerned about for 15 cycles. How do they feel about special operations? Rix laughed. That's complicated. There's respect. Definitely. Most conventional forces have huge respect for what SOF does, but there's also some rivalry, some territorial pride. Your average infantryman will tell you that special operations gets all the cool toys and the glory, while regular units do the heavy lifting. Is that true? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Special operations gets different missions, different training, different equipment, but conventional forces are the backbone of any military. You can't hold territory with 200 people, no matter how well trained. You need numbers, logistics, sustained presence. Special operations does the impossible stuff, but conventional forces do the essential stuff. So, they're complementary. Exactly. Delta can take a building, but you need regular infantry to hold a city. SEALs can hit a target, but you need conventional forces for sustained operations. Rangers can secure an airfield, but you need the whole military machine to exploit it. That's almost reassuring, Vixnell said. Almost. It would be fully reassuring if I didn't know that your regular infantry can march for 40 kilometers in full gear, operate in environments that would kill most species, and apparently consider atmospheric re-entry a viable tactical option. Well, yeah. Rick said they're human. We don't really do normal by anyone else's standards. 3 months later, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Not because of a crisis for once, but because they needed to formalize a new military doctrine that took into account what they'd learned about human special operations. The resulting document, which took 6 weeks to draft and went through 47 revisions, could be summarized as follows. 1. Human special operations forces exist and are terrifying. 2. They represent a tiny fraction of human military capability. 3. Under no circumstances should any council member engage in hostilities with humanity. 4. If forced into joint operations with human self, expect the impossible and plan accordingly. If human ASOF volunteers to help with a situation, accept immediately and get out of their way. 6. Never ever challenge a human to demonstrate their capabilities, unless you're prepared for comprehensive psychological trauma. 7. The mustache incident will not be spoken of again, except at the Droran delegation's insistence, where it would be mentioned as a cautionary tale about human psychological warfare capabilities. The document was officially titled Integration Protocol for Human Special Operations Forces, but was universally known as the Please Don't Hurt Us Guidelines. Vixnell, reviewing the final draft, felt satisfied. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Ambassador Falora entered his office. The humans have sent a response to our integration protocols already. We just transmitted them yesterday. Apparently, they reviewed them quickly. She handed him the datapad. Vixnell read the message to the Galactic Council. We have reviewed your integration protocol for human special operations forces. While we appreciate the thought and effort that went into the document, we feel it may contain some slight exaggerations regarding SOF capabilities. Vixnell stopped reading. Exaggerations? The Kurora's expression was difficult to read. There's more. That said, we understand the Council's concerns and agree that clear protocols for joint operations are beneficial. We accept the proposed guidelines with the following additions. Special operations personnel will make every effort to communicate their tactical plans to Allied forces before execution, time permitting. 2. We will endeavour to explain our methods when they seem unconventional, rather than just telling people to trust the process. The SCOP teams have been reminded that not all cultural monuments are appropriate canvases for psychological warfare, no matter how strategically valuable. 4. We will provide advance notice before conducting any training exercises that might be mistaken for actual combat operations. We look forward to continued cooperation with Council forces and hope that future joint exercises will be less surprising. Respectfully, General Patricia Van Commander, Human Special Operations Command. P.S. If you think the Special Operations Forces were impressive, wait until you see what our intelligence community can do. Just kidding, or are we? Vixel set down the data pad very carefully. Valora, yes, Ambassador. Send a message to the Council. Emergency session tomorrow. What's the topic? Human Intelligence Services. Do we have any information on those? No, that's the problem. Theora was quiet for a moment. Sir, do you think they meant that postscript? Seriously? Vixnall thought about Kowalski appearing from nowhere. About O'Brien's impossible movements. About Foster swimming through ventilation shafts. About Green Berets' weaponizing friendship. And SCOP teams drawing moustaches on sacred monuments. Valora, I have learned one absolute truth about humanity in the past 3 months. What's that, sir? When they say just kidding, they are never ever kidding. Somewhere in human-controlled space, in a facility that officially didn't exist, a CIA officer read the intelligence report on the Council's emergency session and smiled. They're worried about us now, he said to his colleague. Apparently something about special operations scaring them. Special operations? The first officer laughed. Those guys are loud. We're the ones who do the real work. Should we tell them that? What? And ruin the surprise? Nah, let them figure it out. Might cause another panic. Definitely will cause another panic. The officer agreed cheerfully. That's half the fun. In another facility, this one belonging to the NSA, analysts were already monitoring Council communications about human military capabilities. They'd compiled a comprehensive report on the Council's fears, strategies, and internal debates. Nobody on the Council knew they were being monitored. Nobody suspected. That was the point. Think we should tell them we've been reading their encrypted communications for 6 months? One analyst asked. And ruin our access? No way. Fair point. Back on the Council station, Vixnall was having what humans would call a very bad day, and what his species called the universe, being specifically hostile to him personally. Let me understand this correctly, he said to the assembled Council. We have spent 3 months coming to terms with human special operations forces. We have written protocols. We have made contingency plans. We have accepted that humanity has military capabilities that exceed our comprehensive understanding. Nods around the room, and now we discover that they have entirely separate organizations dedicated to intelligence gathering, covert operations, and activities that they won't even clearly define. More nods. Organizations that presumably have been operating without our knowledge or oversight. That's generally how intelligence services work, sir. Thora pointed out, I hate everything about this conversation. Ambassador Plessic, who had recovered from their earlier humiliation and apparently learned nothing, spoke up. Surely we're overreacting. Yes, human special operations proved formidable. But intelligence services are different. They gather information. They analyze data. How threatening can they be? The room was silent. You said the same thing about their regular military. Ficknell pointed out. Then about their special operations. Do you see a pattern here? I refuse to live in fear of a species just because they're exceptionally good at warfare. Plesic, they have separate military units for water, land, air, space, unconventional warfare, psychological operations, cultural engagement, hostage rescue, direct action, special reconnaissance, and probably 17 other things we don't know about yet. They have people whose job is to befriend aliens as a tactical option. They have people whose job is to draw on things to lower morale. They have people who can appear and disappear at will. And you want to not be concerned about what their intelligence services can do. Please deflated slightly. When you put it that way, there's only one way to put it. Brixnell's voice hit harmonics his species, typically reserved for mating displays. We are collectively and individually completely out of our depth when it comes to human military and intelligence capabilities. Sir, a current officer said carefully, perhaps we're approaching this wrong. How so? We keep being surprised by human capabilities because we keep assuming they'll fit into our frameworks. But they don't. They're humans. They evolved on a death world, developed complex social structures based on cooperation and competition, and have spent their entire history finding innovative ways to overcome challenges. Maybe instead of trying to measure them against our standards, we should just accept that they're going to be terrifyingly competent at things we didn't know were possible. Vixnell stared at the officer. That's actually quite insightful. Thank you, sir. It's also completely unhelpful, because it means we can never accurately predict what they're capable of. Yes, sir. That too. The emergency session concluded with a new resolution. The Council would stop trying to comprehensively catalogue human military capabilities and would instead focus on maintaining positive relations with humanity, on the grounds that being their ally was significantly preferable to any alternative. The resolution passed unanimously. 2 years later, during a joint operation against Crayrayan pirates who had been terrorizing Council shipping lanes, the Galactic Council finally saw human forces, conventional and special operations, working at full capacity. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was extremely effective. The pirates who had evaded Council forces for 3 years were eliminated in 6 days. The operation involved conventional human forces, establishing a blockade special operations teams, conducting precision strikes on pirate bases, and much to the Council's surprise intelligence assets, who had apparently infiltrated the pirate organization months earlier and provided real-time tactical data. How long have your intelligence people been embedded with the pirates? Vixnell asked Captain Hrix, who had been promoted to Major and was now the primary human liaison to Council military operations. I can neither confirm nor deny the presence of intelligence assets in that operation, Hrix said, which was basically confirmation. They were there for months before we even knew the pirates were a problem, weren't they? I can neither confirm nor deny, Hrix. Okay, yes, we noticed the pirate activity about 8 months ago, analysed their operations, identified their leadership structure, and inserted assets to gather intelligence. When the Council formally requested assistance, we already had comprehensive data on their organisation, capabilities, and weaknesses. You've been spying in Council space. We prefer the term maintaining situational awareness. Hrix corrected. And before you get upset, we've been sharing relevant intelligence with Council security services the entire time. How do you think you guys caught that smuggling operation in Sector 12 last month? That was our intelligence. That was our intelligence that we fed through your intelligence services to protect our sources and methods. Rick said, "You're welcome." By the way, Vixnall should have been angry. He should have been offended. He should have filed a formal protest. Instead, he just felt tired. How many human intelligence assets are currently operating in council space? He asked. I can neither that many. Let's just say we'd like to be thorough. Are they monitoring this conversation? Hendricks smiled. What do you think? In a facility that officially didn't exist, an NSA analyst noted the conversation, updated their report on Council human relations, and went back to monitoring the 17 other intelligence operations currently active in Council space. Diplomatic aspects, and more interested in the fact that Earth was, according to all reports, barely survivable for most species. Your planet is terrifying, he told Rix as they walked through the city. The gravity is too high. The atmospheric pressure is wrong. The oxygen levels are borderline toxic. And don't get me started on the bacteria. We called them germs. And yeah, Earth is pretty intense if you didn't evolve here. Chris agreed. But that's kind of the point. We evolved here. This is normal for us. Normal, Vixnell repeated, watching a human child, a child, ride past on a primitive wheeled device, at speeds that would be considered reckless on most civilized worlds. We're a hardy species, Hendricks said. Had to be to survive on Earth. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, climate variations, other humans. Our planet threw everything at us, and we adapted by becoming predators yourselves. Well, yeah, persistence hunters technically. We didn't evolve to be the fastest or the strongest. We evolved to be the most stubborn. We could chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We could survive wounds that would kill most predators. We could adapt to almost any environment. And that translated into your military capabilities. It translated into everything. Crix corrected. Our entire culture is built around overcoming challenges, adapting to new situations, and never ever giving up. Special operations is just that philosophy taken to its logical extreme. They walked for a while in silence, watching humans go about their daily lives. Vixnell noticed that even civilians moved with a certain confidence, a certainty of purpose that most species only developed through military training. Can I ask you something? He said finally. Sure. When your species first developed space travel, when you first realized there were other intelligent species out there, what did you think? Rix considered this. Honestly, we were excited. Humanity had spent centuries wondering if we were alone in the universe. Finding out we weren't, that was amazing. It meant there were new people to meet, new cultures to learn from, new friends to make, and new threats to defend against. Well, yeah, Rix admitted, we're not naive. We knew that not every species would be friendly, but our first instinct wasn't fear or aggression. It was curiosity. We wanted to know who you were, how you lived, what you believed in, and the military build-up precaution. Rix said, simply, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. It's a human saying. We wanted friendship, but we weren't going to be unprepared if that didn't work out. You built special operations forces before you even made first contact. We've had special operations forces for centuries. Hendricks said, before spaceflight, before computers, before most of our modern technology, because sometimes you need people who can operate in impossible situations. That's not about preparing for aliens. That's about preparing for any crisis. They reached a small park overlooking the city. Human children played on equipment that looked designed to cause injury. Adults exercised in ways that would strain most species' physiology. Everyone seemed to be doing something that required effort, challenge, and risk. You're all insane, Vixnell observed. Probably, Rix agreed cheerfully. But we're your insane allies. And after 5 years of working together, I'd like to think we've proven that humanity can be trusted. You've proven that you're terrifyingly competent, Vixnol corrected. Trust is still being negotiated. Fair enough. Vixnol watched a group of humans engage in what appeared to be organized combat for recreational purposes. They called it football, and it seemed to involve controlled violence and strategic planning. Tris, yeah, I'm glad you're on our side. Me too, Ambassador. Me too. The summit concluded successfully. New treaties were signed. Trade agreements were expanded. Cultural exchange programs were established. And perhaps most importantly, the Galactic Council formally acknowledged that human military capabilities, while still not fully understood, were no longer considered a threat to Council security. On the contrary, they were considered the Council's best defense. 6 months after the Earth Summit, the Korean Empire, a hostile power outside Council space, made the catastrophic decision to attack a Council outpost. They came with a fleet of 200 warships, expecting the Council's usual response: diplomatic protests, economic sanctions, and perhaps a small military response that would take weeks to organize. What they got instead was a human carrier group that had been on routine patrol nearby. The battle lasted 40 minutes. The Seans never figured out what hit them. Their ships were systematically disabled by weapons they couldn't detect. Boarding parties appeared in their secured areas despite all security measures. Their communications were jammed. Their sensors showed false readings. And at one point, their fleet commander personal computer started playing human music at maximum volume. When it was over, the Korean fleet was dead in space. Their crews were secured in their own brigs, and a small card had been left on each ship's bridge. Courtesy of the human navy. Please don't attack our friends. Regards. The Council's response was swift. They didn't question how humans had happened to be nearby. They didn't ask about the weapons used. They didn't inquire about the boarding tactics or the electronic warfare capabilities. They just sent a formal thank you note and quietly updated their defense agreements with humanity. Ambassador Vixnol, reading the after-action reports, noticed something interesting. The operation had involved conventional human naval forces, special operations teams, cyber warfare specialists, intelligence assets, and probably a dozen other capabilities that weren't mentioned in the official reports. It had been, in human terms, a routine response to hostile action routine. Vixnol filed the report, updated his personal threat assessments, and sent a message to Major Rix. 40 minutes seems excessive. Are your people getting slow? The response came back 30 seconds later. We were being polite. Could have done it in 20, but didn't want to show off. Vixnol laughed. It was a sound his species rarely made. A deep harmonic that indicated genuine amusement, rather than social obligation. 10 years after humanity joined the Galactic Council, Vixnol was invited to attend a change of command ceremony at Fort Bragg, the headquarters of US Army Special Operations Command. He accepted, curious to see how humans marked such occasions. The ceremony was formal, with speeches and tradition and military precision. But what struck Vixnol most was the people. These special operators, these warriors, who had caused him so much stress over the years, were just people. They had families. They told jokes. They celebrated their achievements and mourned their losses. You thought we'd be different, Major Rix? Now, Colonel Rix asked, noticing his expression. I thought you'd be more, I don't know, warrior-like. We are warriors, Rix said. But we're also human. We don't stop being people just because we have dangerous jobs. If anything, the job makes the personal connections more important. Vixnol watched as a retiring Special Forces colonel said goodbye to his team, saw the genuine emotion in their expressions, the bonds that went deeper than military duty. "I misjudged you," he admitted. "All of you. I thought you were weapons. Dangerous, effective, terrifying weapons. But you're not, are you? We're people who do a dangerous job," Hendrik said. "The job requires us to be capable of violence. But it doesn't define us. We fight to protect, not because we love fighting. We train to be excellent, not because we want to dominate. We push ourselves to extremes because people depend on us." And the regular military, same thing, just different missions. Every person in uniform, whether they're special operations or conventional forces, is there because they believe in something larger than themselves. Service, sacrifice, protecting others, even when it's terrifying. Especially then, Rix smiled. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Ambassador. It's acting despite fear. And yeah, our job is scary sometimes, but it's also meaningful, important." Vixnell understood finally. Not just the capability, but the purpose behind it. The culture that created warriors like this wasn't built on aggression or conquest. It was built on responsibility. "Your species is still terrifying," he said. "I know, but I think I understand why now." "Oh, you're terrifying because you care," Vixnell said. "You build these impossible capabilities. You train to these insane standards. You push yourselves beyond reasonable limits, not because you want to conquer or dominate, but because you feel responsible for protecting others, even others who aren't your own species." Chris was quiet for a moment. That's probably the nicest thing anyone's ever said about humanity's military. Don't let it go to your head. You're still absolutely not allowed to train any council species in your methods. We weren't planning to. Good, because I've read the preliminary reports on what happens when non-humans try to train like humans. The injury rates are unacceptable. Yeah, our physiology is kind of uniquely suited to our training methods, Rix admitted. We didn't realize how much of our capability was based on our evolution until we started working with other species. Your evolution on a death world that wanted you dead. Exactly. But hey, it made us really good at not dying. Frixnell laughed again. After 10 years of knowing humans, he'd gotten much better at it. 15 years after humanity joined the Galactic Council, the Droran Military Academy invited a team of human special operations instructors to give a lecture series on unconventional warfare. It went about as well as expected, which is to say it was educational, terrifying, and resulted in 3 Droran cadets requesting transfers to human exchange programs. 20 years in, human special operations forces were considered the Council's elite rapid response capability, deployed for missions that no other species could handle. 30 years in, the Council stopped trying to categorize human military capabilities and just accepted that humans would periodically demonstrate new abilities that seemed impossible until they were ent. And 50 years after humanity joined the Galactic Council, when Ambassador Vixnell retired, he gave a speech that would be remembered for generations. When humanity joined the Council, he said to the assembled delegates, "We were afraid, not without reason. They were and are terrifyingly capable. But over the decades, we've learned something important. Human capability isn't about dominance. It's about responsibility. They don't train to be the best because they want to lord it over others. They train to be the best because they feel obligated to protect those who can't protect themselves." He paused, looking around the chamber at species from 100 worlds. Their special operations forces are legendary now. Council children grow up hearing stories about them, but those stories miss the point. Yes, they're extraordinary warriors. Yes, they can do impossible things, but more importantly, they're good people doing a difficult job. And that's what makes them truly special. The chamber was silent. So when I retire today, I leave you with this advice. Trust the humans. Not because they can't hurt you, they absolutely can, but because they won't. Not unless you give them cause. And if you do give them cause, Vixnell smiled. Well, then you'll discover firsthand what humanity means by special forces. And trust me, you really don't want that. The applause was genuine, warm, and for several species, tinged with relief that they were firmly on humanity's good side. Colonel Hicks, now General Hendricks, commander of Joint Special Operations Task Force Galactic, attended the retirement ceremony. Afterward, she found Vixnell alone, looking out at the stars. "Hell of a speech," she said. "It was honest," Vixnell replied. "Your species scared me for decades. Still does sometimes. But I trust you. That's the difference. We trust you too," Hendricks said. "All of you. That's why we're here. Not to dominate, not to conquer, just to help. Even when helping involves appearing from nowhere, neutralizing threats, and occasionally drawing on monuments. Especially then," Hicks grinned. "Someone's got to keep things interesting." Vixnell looked at her, this human warrior who had become a friend over the decades, and realized something. "You know what the real trick was," he said. "What's that? You made us believe that humans were normal. Not safe, not predictable, but normal. Just another species trying to get by in a complicated galaxy. And by the time we realized you were anything but normal, it was too late. We already liked you." "That wasn't a trick," Hendricks said softly. "We are normal by our standards anyway. Every species thinks they're normal and everyone else is weird. We just happen to be normal in ways that seem extreme to others. You're still not normal." "Fair point," Rix laughed. "But we're your kind of abnormal, and that's what matters." They stood together, human and Corinth, watching ships come and go from the station. Somewhere out there, human special operations forces were training, preparing, maintaining their edge, doing what they'd always done, what they'd always do, pushing themselves to impossible standards because someone somewhere might need them to do impossible things. "You know what I learned in 50 years of dealing with humanity?" Vixnell said. "What's that?" "That impossible is just a human word for challenging." "Damn right it is," Rix agreed. And in the darkness of space, carried on frequencies most species couldn't hear, a message broadcast from a human ship on patrol. "Special Operations Task Force 7 to Council Station. We have the watch. The all quiet, all safe. The Council could rest easy. Not because there were no threats in the galaxy. There always would be, but because humanity had special forces. And despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty and the occasional moustache-related incident, that was perhaps the most reassuring thing in the universe. After all, they were terrifying. But they were there terrifying. The end.